Their code is only for it, so whatever you do, don't get shot down.
All players, low down, active, bullseye, 1327, for tactical.
Lights on.
Welcome to the show. Some motherhood before we get started. Like, follow, and subscribe. And most important, don't keep a secret. Share the newsletter and the show with your network so they can be as smart as you. Motherhood is complete. Today, we're going to pick a piece of defense tech and dig into it, the laser-guided bomb, specifically the Paveway II laser-guided bomb. We'll talk more about that nomenclature in just a bit. But that's not really our style, just to talk about it. So instead, we tracked down one of the first users of the laser-guided bomb in combat. Ed Cobleigh, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Ed flew F-4s in Vietnam. You were there in 1968 when Paveway went into combat field testing. You flew in the 433rd, Satan's Angels, in the 8th Tactical Fighter Wing, based out of Thailand, and you totaled 2 tours and about 375 combat missions. Those 2 tours and what you did after all kind of weave into the story. So Ed, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on.
Thank you.
Ed, I discovered you actually from one of your books, which is how this whole thing got set in motion. I was interested in doing some research on tracking down some firsthand accounts from Paveway way back in Vietnam, and even before, if we could track that down. And in that process, I actually came across one of your books, War for the Hell of It. And in that book, you tell a remarkable story about some of the first combat drops of the Paveway laser-guided bombs in Vietnam. So I'm really looking forward to hearing you tell about the stories from the book.
Okay, well, the background is I was assigned to the 433rd as a backseater, a gib, or the guy at the back, and like you said, 1968. And at that time, a team from Eglin Air Force Base brought over the Paveway system. This was actually the Paveway I, the original bombs. And they tagged our squadron to introduce that and to test it. It had been tested at Eglin, worked fairly well in peacetime, and they wanted to see if it was actually going to work. And as background, the activity of terminally guided munitions, smart bombs, was a activity that was unblemished by success. In World War I, they tried radio-controlled biplanes. That didn't work very well. World War II, radio-controlled drone bombers, not very well. The Germans had some success with radio-controlled bombs against the Italian fleet, but that was kind of it. In the Cold War in the 1950s, we had a terminally guided munition called the bullpup, which was not very successful. You had to fly your airplane with the right hand and fly the bullpup with your left hand, which was not easy.
Yeah.
And so with that as a background, when the team arrived from Eglin with the laser-guided bombs, we were unimpressed. We didn't know that these things were actually going to work. And so the background of Paveway was, it was developed by so I'm not making this up, a couple of guys in their garage in Eglin. And they came up with the idea that he could shine a laser of the target and picture, these cat toys that you have, that's the little laser thing, and you shine the cat toy on the ground and the cat goes after it. It works just like a laser pointer. You point the laser at the target, and then if you have a seeker in the front of the bomb that sees that laser reflectivity and guides to the spot of the ground. Simple enough. They built up these Paveway guidance kits. They used kind of a Shrike guidance unit. They had a forward quadrant laser seeker in the front with a weather vane on it that steered into the relative wind. And in the back of the guidance unit were guidance fins, and the back of the bomb, stubby little wings to give it more lift.
It's funny you mentioned that, like, hey, can we do this with that and put these things together? The technology to actually prove the concept that you could use pulse laser to guide things was developed by the Army in the early 60s. And they actually started some contracts down the road, one of them being North American Aviation and the other one being RCA, the TV company, and North American Aviation from F-86 fame. Interestingly enough, Texas Instruments back in the Army project got a contract to explore adapting the Shrike, the AGM-45 that you talked about, and that itself is based off of the AIM-7. And for those of you who just don't realize this, back then, Texas Instruments built the AGM-45. Like, they were the missile builder.
Right.
So way different than a calculator company that we think about today.
Right.
But in 1965, the Army, they actually shelved the program because they were trying to build a laser designator that a soldier could carry and for a tank to shoot munitions. And when Vietnam kicked off, they said, well, tank and soldiers with lasers seems crazy. So they shelved the program. They basically said, Air Force, hey, FYI, we have this thing. And the Air Force immediately picked it up, said, we might be able to do something with this. And that became Project 1559, which is the Rapid Acquisition, Rapid Development program that you alluded to. So it was $100,000 in 6 months to basically take the Army work and adapt it for an Air Force mission.
Right.
They brought in those two contractors, North American Aviation and Texas Instruments, to compete. Texas Instruments won. And then more just historic context, their subcontractor from Texas Instruments was Ford Aerospace. They actually built the optics for the seeker for the laser-guided bomb because at the time, they were the industry leader for seeker optics. They were the AIM-9 missile seeker builder at the time, which is just crazy about how much the world was different back then.
Yeah, they worked for China Lake a lot.
Yeah, that's right. They were at China Lake all the time.
Yeah.
And in Texas Instruments, they basically didn't have access to a wind tunnel or time. And so they used a swimming pool and wooden models to basically validate the using the Mark 80 series. And as you alluded to, the Bang Bang guidance is what they with the four quad seeker sector. They did that because it was really easy to figure out. It wasn't as good, but it was really easy and it was really simple and it was really cheap. And cost and simplicity became like a huge factor in the Eglin tech maturation. And so Texas Instruments got selected to move forward with that Shrike adaptation, the Bang Bang guidance. And this is where Project White Lightning comes into play and where you intercept the team in 1968, right?
That's right.
All right, so you show up. You're on the ramp in Thailand. This team shows up, the Task Force Paveway, I believe it was called, and they originally had two different versions of the bomb, I think. Or which version did you end up doing the combat drops with?
Well, the original was the 2,000-pound Mark 84, and then they also had a kit for the 3,000-pound bomb, which we call Fat Albert. But the two that we dropped were the 2,000-pounder and the 3,000-pounder. Later on, of course, they adapted the kit to the 500-pound Mark 82.
And for those who are involved in the modern military and you're asking, where is the 3,000-pound bomb body? It doesn't exist anymore in the U.S. arsenal, but back then it did. Yeah. And it was developed under a different shape.
Yeah, it was kind of a bulbous shape, and I think we dropped the ball. That's why there's no more left.
Yeah, that's probably true. Yeah. But because of the shapes of these two warheads were really, really different, the guidance kits and how they were adapted was different. So on the Fat Albert version, the steerable fins were in the back. Right. And on the Mark 84 version, the steerable fins were in the front. Right?
That's right. Yeah.
All right. So you're on the ramp, and with the summer of 1968 timeframe, where Paveway I Task Force shows up, and they show up with these weapons, they show up with these laser designators. So tell us about that.
Well, the laser designator fit into the back seat, and it was about 4 inches thick, and it slid down between the canopy rail and the left-hand side of the ejection seat. And it contained a laser, infrared version, 1.06 microns, I think it was, pulsed at 10 pulses a second, and it reflected out through optics, through steerable mirrors, out the left-hand side of the canopy rail. And co-located with those optics was a 4-power crosshair scope. The mirrors were steered by a little joystick on the side of the illuminator. And the way it works would be the guy in front, the aircraft commander, would set up a pylon turn around the target in about a 30-degree bank and try to fly as smoothly as possible. And then the backseater would put his eye against the eyepiece, look through the eyepiece and see the crosshair superimposed on the ground, which represented where the laser was pointing on the ground. In the back seat with the joystick, you kept the crosshairs on the target, illuminating the target. Now, usually had a wingman, we always had a wingman, who had the bombs on board. He would have 2 Mark 84s on board. And he would also have 3 Mark 82 dumb bombs from the centerline station, smart bombs versus dumb bombs. The smart bomb knows where the target is. The dumb bomb only knows where the ground is. And so the dumb bombs were dropped simultaneously with the Paveways as a test, because if they both hit in the same hole, the Paveway didn't guide. If the Paveway guided, the Mark 82 would hit about 1,000 feet short, and you could tell that, yes, indeed, the Paveway guidance system had worked. Anyway, so the illuminator was flying a pylon turned around the target. The bomber would climb up to 23,000 feet. We originally started out with 45-degree dive, and then we found out that steeper was better because it gave the bomb more energy to work with. And you, in effect, did a fixed angle bombing run with the Mark 84. I forgot the number of mils that you dialed into the target. And you put the gun sight of the target, pickled off the bomb, and then both bombs, and you saw what happened. Well, at first we thought this was in it, that pie in the sky, how can something this simple actually work? And just as an aside, the little 4-panel laser seeker on the front of the bomb was on a gimbal, which allowed it to steer into the relative wind, but on the ground it drooped because there was no relative wind. And so you'd taxi out to the runway, and the ground crew would come up and say, plug in and say, there's something wrong with your bomb, the seeker's drooping.
They still do that today.
They said, no, that's the way it's supposed to be. Anyway, the first tests were spectacular. I mean, it was just, as I said, it's like being a deity. You would put your crosshairs on the target, the bomber would call in, bombs released, you'd hold the little crosshair on the target, and 10 or 15 seconds later, the target would be obliterated.
But you're the only one that can see it because you have this optical scope that's zoomed in on the target, and there's no countdown anywhere, right?
They can see the impact. The bomber could see the impact as he pulled off, and the guy in the front seat could see it. But you could, smoke and dust obscured where it hit, and so the illuminator was the only guy who could tell exactly how accurate it was. And we didn't have any way to measure that, but our estimate was that all things being nominal, you could put a 2,000-pound bomb within 10 feet of a target, which pretty much guaranteed its destruction. And so after the bomber had dropped his 2 bombs, the 2 pilots switched roles. Bomber, now without bombs, was the illuminator, and the ex-illuminator dropped the bomb. So you'd end up with 4 Mark 84s on one mission. Later on, we decided to go to 3 ships, which a 3-ship formation is about as wieldy as a hog on roller skates. You really don't know what's going on. But it found out that worked well because we had enough fuel and we had enough targets that we could illuminate for 6 bombs. And out of those 6 bombs, if we did not have 6 direct hits, it was not a good day.
Wow. How did you... Let's back up a little bit. How did you train for that first sortie?
Well, they gave us a ground briefing, which was about half an hour. And most of it was, we were concerned that we were looking through optics that the laser was looking through. And, what's that going to do to the retina of your eye? And they spent a lot of time telling us that there was no chance of back reflection. And indeed, later on, we had to get eye retina scans to make sure that we weren't indeed burning our retinas. But it was kind of a, here it is, guys, go do it. There was no simulator, there's no trainer. It's just, this is the way it works. And to be honest, it wasn't all that complicated. Once you got the idea, and once the guy in the front seat realized how to fly a pylon turn smoothly, It wasn't that difficult.
So there was plenty of bombs, and it sounds like in that initial combat testing, there was only so many of these airborne laser designators. There's 4, total of 4 in existence.
Right.
Wow.
They're told there's only 4, so whatever you do, don't get shot down.
These were the AVQ-9 airborne laser designator, and it had a nickname called the Zot, right?
Yeah, the guys that did it, mainly the backseaters, once we showed some success with it, the morale went up, and they came up with the idea of a Zot. Remember the comic strip DC, and they had the anteater.
Oh yeah.
The anteater would flash his tongue out and eat an ant, and the caption would say Zot. So we kind of adopted that, and we even had patches made with anteater, and it said Zot Paveway. So that was kind of the nickname of the operation.
Nice. How many did you end up dropping during the combat evals?
That's a good question. I want to say 20 or 30, but that's a guess. I really don't remember how many. But once it proved to be a success, which didn't take long, then the kits started arriving, pretty quickly. So we never ran out of kits.
We talked about it before. We just want to go back real quick and emphasize the original names of all of this. So PAVE was an acronym.
Right.
Precision Avionics Vector Equipment, Paveway, so guiding the way with the laser. And it was originally a all caps PAVE and then a separate word way. Those got truncated into one word, which we might talk about later. But the numbers also were different. So Paveway 1 was the laser. Paveway 2 was a TV, I think, TV guided. And then Paveway 3 was an IR guided one that no one ever developed. All right, so we do the drops in 1968. We have the 4 designators who drop dozens and dozens of these weapons in the summer, and then right after that, Rolling Thunder ends.
Right,
and so the bombing campaign was largely suspended until 1972. So
no, when Rolling Thunder ended, the bombing campaign switched to Laos, and so nearly all of our sorties for 3 years were in Laos, Cambodia, and a few in South Vietnam.
Oh, okay. That's good to clarify. And so you left your first tour, and then you came back for your second tour about a year or 2 later. Is that right?
8 months later, I went back to upgrade to the front seat in the 4. Upgraded it to McDill Air Force Base in Florida. Checked out in the front seat, which wasn't terribly difficult because it had 600 hours in the back seat, and you just had to get used to looking out the front instead of the side. And then transferred back to Southeast Asia, and I was at Da Nang originally, and I didn't care much for Da Nang. I thought that was not a very good place to be stationed. So I called up the 433rd at Ubon and said, hey, can you get me out of here? And they said, we're glad you called because we're having trouble with the Paveway program. Our accuracy is down, our success is down, and it's mainly due to all the old heads that knew what they were doing, rotating. And so we need somebody that knows what they're doing. And so I said, I'm on my way. And after that phone call, I went down to the air depot, hopped on a Marine C-130 and flew to Ubon, rejoined the 433rd, with no orders, no authorization, no nothing. It basically went AWOL in country.
So tell me about your second tour now. You're back, you're going back to the same unit, doing laser guided bombs again in Vietnam. This is 1969.
Same squadron, same mission, only I'm in the front seat most of the time this time.
So you spent another year back
right,
dropping the paveways?
What was interesting is that in Laos, it was kind of a good test for the system because most of the targets are heavily camouflaged. It took a while to identify where the targets were. And our targets were gun emplacements, AAA emplacements, bridges, the occasional truck if we couldn't find any other targets. And at one time during the dry season, Of course, the dry season in Laos is the same as a wet season in Vietnam. And our squadron was collecting more BDA, bomb damage assessment, than the rest of the tactical air force in country. And that didn't sit well with the other squadrons, but hey, we took the chance in trying this new system, and it worked out. In the meantime, the U.S. Navy realized that we were racking up all this BDA, and they weren't. And so they decided to jump on the Paveway bandwagon, bought a bunch of Paveway kits, put them on, I think it was the USS Hancock. Yeah, it was USS Hancock, and shipped them to Southeast Asia. The only problem was they didn't have a laser illuminator. And their laser illuminator was basically a shoebox with leather handles at each end and a gun sight on the top. And so the plan was to use the 2CA4 and put a guy in the back with his shoebox, and then TA4 guy would circle the target, and the guy in the back would illuminate the target with a shoebox. They realized that maybe this wasn't the best idea in the whole world, and so they sent me over to the Hancock to instruct the Navy on how to make this work. There's two big problems. One is the shoebox wasn't at all stabilized. It wasn't attached to the airplane. It was just handheld, and the Paveway had the ability to steer out some movement from the target, but it can't steer out hundreds of yards of gear, which is what you would have. The second problem was the people that they designated to ride around in the back seat were F8 drivers, because none of the 84 guys wanted to do it. So the F8 drivers were going to do the lasing, which they weren't at all happy with. And when I told them that not only were they not all happy with it, their accuracy was probably going to be terrible, and they were all going to get big black eyes. And so they said, thanks very much, and you can go back to Ubon now. So I don't know how they did after that, but the Navy's approach to it was not destined for success.
That's great. After you left your second tour, you ended up coming back to teach at Nellis at the weapons school. What year was that?
71, I think. I think it was 71. And the weapons school realized that these terminally guided munitions were actually good. They actually worked. We always pitched them as the, quote, wave of the future, unquote. But they realized that the weapons school didn't have anybody that knew anything about them, because they were all old heads, from F-100s and things like that. And so they transferred me back there to transfer some of this knowledge, along with some other guys, not all by myself. And we formed the terminally guided weapons flight in the weapons school. I went through the weapons school, graduated, and stayed on as an instructor. And we put people through terminally guided munitions schools, not the weapons school, but I instructed in the weapons school as well. But yeah, it was very, very rewarding, because I started out in my academic briefing, and that was the title of the briefing, was The Wave of the Future. And the guys would sit there and say, yeah, we've heard this before. We've heard about bullpups. And by the time that they had practiced with it, they were all believers.
And you're in the 414th, right?
Correct.
The 414th Fighter Weapons Squadron, back then, it's now known as the 414th Combat Training Squadron, which might not sound familiar to a lot of listeners. But the thing that they do which is red flag. So they're the unit now that runs red flag. So it's a little historic connection there.
Well, that's an aside. I know it's off subject, but red flag got generated by myself and three other guys who got drunk one night and came up with a plan. The guy's name was Moody Suter, who actually had the plan.
Oh, yeah.
But Joe Hurd, who went on to 2 stars, Gail Peck, who recently passed away, we sat around and we were not at all happy with the realism that the weapons school was putting out in terms of training. And we also saw the statistics that said most combat losses occurred during the first 10 missions of combat. And if we could replicate those 10 missions, we could it saved a lot of guys' lives. And that's where red flag came up, and it took off, and now it's an ongoing institution.
I didn't actually know you were connected to Moody Suitors. That's awesome.
Yeah, he was my flight commander.
Oh man, that's great. So you're at Nellis now. Let's talk about LGBs at Nellis. Then this is early 70s. This is before Linebacker kicks off. Pave Knife, do those exist yet? Those pods?
They came in just as I was leaving, and I wrote the tactics manual for Pave Knife, although I never flew it, so it was kind of a leap of faith. But in the training, there were no training LGBs. It was all dry drops. And we had the backseat illuminators, but they didn't have lasers. They had 16 millimeter cameras. And so you could pretend to be lazy and come back off the film and see how steady you are at holding the crosshairs on the target. That was the total amount of LGB or Paveway training that we were able to do.
Wow, that's crazy. And again, the lack of the weapons because they're being deployed to Vietnam, and the lack of the designators, whether it's the ZOT, which is the one in the backseat of the F4, or the Pave Knife pod. And my understanding is by the time that 1972 happened, there was only like 6 to 9 of these pods in existence, and built by Ford because of the optics again.
Right.
These things are massive.
Oh, it was like 2,000 pounds. It was a huge thing. Yeah.
They didn't last too long. They got replaced later by the Pave Spike and then Pave Tac.
Correct.
If I remember right.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So we're at Nellis, we're training people to go back to Vietnam. 1971, you're at Nellis doing this. 1972, we have Operation Linebacker. One of the first missions was to go take out 2 particular bridges, the Paul Dumar Bridge, the first one, right?
Correct, and the Dragon's Jaw Bridge was the other one.
Do you remember the stories behind those 2 bridges? They're infamous lore in laser-guided bomb history.
Yeah, the Dragon's Jaw Bridge down in Route Pack 2, I think the total was like 75 airplanes lost, including the C-130, and 35 pilots lost, and we just couldn't bring it down. If you look at a girder bridge, it's mostly air. It's just a spider web of beams. It's a railroad bridge. And, the bombs will just go through the gaps in between the girders and explode in the river. And you might get a bent beam or so, but by the next morning it was all fixed.
For listeners' context, and if you're watching this on YouTube, I'll show you a picture or two of what it looked like. But imagine a bridge. It was called the Tonwa Bridge, Dragon's Jaws, what everyone called it.
Right.
It's 500 feet long, 50 feet wide, and it sits 50 feet off of the water. And it has one pylon in the center kind of holding it up, and then it has the embankments on each side with concrete kind of...
abutments, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. And 873 is the number. The Air Force and Navy combined flew 873 combat sorties against the bridge to knock it down.
Right.
And they were never able to knock it down until one day.
Yeah.
when we have laser-guided bombs and Operation Linebacker starts.
I know the guys that did it, and it gave me a great deal of pride. I was still back at Nellis, and heard that they'd taken out the Thanwa Bridge. I knew the guys in the flight, and it was one of those, it's like being the manager of a baseball team and your guys go out and win the World Series. That was really rewarding.
If I remember the story right, 12 F4s,
right.
8 of them with the 2,000 pounder, which I think by then they designated the GBU-10. And then we get out to the GBU-12 was the smaller one that mostly is employed nowadays. We'll get to that later. So the Air Force hit it first mission, direct hit, damages it. I want to say they attack it again, and then the Navy comes in about 2 months later, and they want it completely removed from the target list.
Right, yeah. And it was a long time in coming, but had it not been for Paveway and laser-guided bombs, that bridge would still be there.
Just it's hard to comprehend the why we're doing this episode, it's hard to comprehend just the impact that the microchip and the laser put together to solve this problem, to turn a dumb bomb into a smart bomb. That GBU-10, the 2,000 pounder, they ended up scaling that down to the GBU-12, which is a 500 pounder that was fielded right at the end of Vietnam. So I don't even think it got any combat drops in Vietnam, but it was this, in 76, I believe. Then they created a 1,000-pound version, the GBU-16 for the Navy. All of those weapons that I just explained, all of them are still used today.
Right.
They're still used today. And pretty much the exact same technology that was developed back then on a shoestring budget in a few months of time, and guys going out there and trying to figure stuff out, which I think is just an amazing story.
Yeah, I'm currently working on a new book, and the new book is on the F-117 Nighthawk. And, of course, they were very active during the Iraq War. And like you said, each Nighthawk carried 2 Mark 84 Paveways that looked just like the ones that I dropped. Again, it's very rewarding to see something I worked on still in use and so used effectively during the Iraq War.
Yeah, in fact, slight tangent, we talked about Paveway 1 became Paveway 2 when they got rid of all of the original designations for different types. Well, then Paveway 2, all of the weapons that we just said, the GBU-10, the GBU-12, the GBU-16, all those weapons, this whole story is all Paveway 2, which is a bang-bang laser guidance.
Right.
In the early 80s, they created a Paveway III, which is a pro-nav laser guidance, and that became the GBU-24. It's a massive fins. It flies very far, very long, very low. It was built for the Cold War in Europe. Well, when the F-117 came around, they needed a weapon to fit in the weapons bay, and the GBU-24 wouldn't fit. And so the F-117 laser-guided bomb is called the GBU-27, and it uses the GBU-10 tail kit and the GBU-24 nose, and it mashes them together with some optic changes.
The seeker on that one is an adapted sidewinder seeker with obviously different spectrum with proportional navigation. And so it has more range and more versatility, but it doesn't have any more accuracy, because once you're within, 3 meters of a target, how much more accuracy can you have,
Interestingly enough, the Paveway III series is all being pushed out of the inventory, sustainment, and it's a very expensive, very complicated weapon. Mission planning is a pain in the ass. And combat success-wise, because of the complexities of the seeker and the mission planning, the hit rate combat-wise is not that high. You would think it'd be higher.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, Paveway 2, very, very, it's simple. It's so easy to use, and it's relatively inexpensive when you look at kind of all the other tech of the time. And so it's still used today. And when the consolidation happened in the defense industry in the 90s, this is a little bit going into kind of modern day stuff. Texas Instruments sold their Texas production line of Paveway to Raytheon.
Right.
And so Raytheon ended up buying it. And they were, during the time, if I remember this right, during the time when they were transitioning that, there was a gap in production because they were moving the plant. And so the Air Force contracted Lockheed Martin to build Paveway laser-guided bombs, which was supposed to be Texas Instruments going to Raytheon. And so because of that contract, there was a time for probably now almost 20 years, 25 years, that both Raytheon and Lockheed Martin build Paveway laser-guided bombs for the government and for foreign customers. So it's kind of one of those weird stories.
Things coming full circle. At that time, I was out of the Air Force. I was working for Hughes Aircraft Company. Around 91 or 92, Hughes Aircraft Company merged with Raytheon. And so I was back in the laser-guided bomb business.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So there was we talked earlier about the Paveway being 2 words, and then it kind of got truncated into 1 word, where this co-production became an issue after a while, and Lockheed Martin and Raytheon actually went through about a 4 or 5 year lawsuit about who owns the right to the name. And so Paveway, if you see it now online, it has a It is a registered trademark name.
Has a little R next to it.
Yeah, it's got a little R next to it now if you look online. And then Lockheed is allowed to, as part of the deal, they're allowed to use Paveway in their own product promotion. They call it Paveway II Plus, and they're not allowed to put anything else on it. So they don't have GPS, where the Raytheon Paveways have dual mode operation. So it's laser and GPS. So there's all these weird nuances, being in the industry.
For a 50-year-old system.
That's right. Well, Ed, tell us, so the first book, we kind of alluded to in the beginning, that was based off of your time in Vietnam, but you have another book just about the rest of those stories that we were talking about from your time in Nellis, right?
Yeah, one of the challenges in writing books that are read a lot by fighter pilots is that you get a lot of direct feedback from the readers, and they're usually accompanied by a finger poke in the chest. And more for the hell of it, spent 3.5 weeks as an Amazon #1 bestseller. And then a lot of the feedback I was getting, mostly from people that I knew, said, well, what about the rest? I mean, what else did you do other than this? And so I wrote another memoir called And I Live to Tell the Tales of my life before and after the 2 combat tours. I did a tour with Top Gun. I did 2 years with the Royal Air Force. I did 2 summers in Iran. And so I put all those peacetime flying stories in, and I'd love to tell the tales. In that book, it only spent 3.5 days as an Amazon #1 bestseller, but okay, I'll take that.
Well, Ed, I'm extremely happy that you spent the time and effort to put your experiences down in writing. Otherwise, I never would have found the books. I never would have found you. I never would have had the chance to talk to you. So I really do appreciate you sharing your stories, both in writing and with us today. Before we go, where can everyone find your books?
You can either go to Amazon and type in Ed Cobleigh books, and you'll get all 5 of them. Or you can go to my website, which is www.edcobleigh.com, and that'll take you to the website, and all the books are listed there with links to Amazon. But basically, Amazon is the place to go get them. And there's 5 of them. There's 2 memoirs, 2 novels, and a biography of an early aviation pioneer named Roland Garros, who was practically the first fighter pilot. And that was named the best new book on World War I.
To sum up, we have 5 books, 2 ways to find them. You can find them on Amazon, or you can find them by going to the website. We're going to have links to both of them in the show notes to check it out. So, Ed, thanks so much for your time. Really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it. Good luck. And check 6.